15 minutes here today to give you an overview of the methodology. Once again, for those, I think most of you know me, I'm Antonio Loftley. I'm the lead monitor for the Seattle Consent Decree. We're in I think, a really wonderful phase right now that we're really looking forward to working with you on moving forward. So just in a broad strokes view, the new monitoring team came in to take another look at where Seattle policing is and the city is at with its constitutional and equitable policing. And the way we start our work, as you know, is we engage with you and others to develop a monitoring plan. So essentially, we're looking at this year, 2021, and what we want to do to take a look at policing in a comprehensive way over this coming year as a bridge to what may come into next year. A major component of that monitoring plan was developing a methodology. And methodology meaning a way to measure the Seattle Policing Department and the accountability partners and the ecosystem as a whole as to whether or not it's meeting some of the core areas of the consent decree. And that work is important because the main goal for the monitoring team is to work with all of you in the city to close out and bring Seattle Police Department successfully to compliance with the consent decree so that we can move on to building the future of policing. And so this looking at a comprehensive review of the Seattle Police Department is really important. And that methodology is based on four key areas that are in the consent decree. One is looking at use of force. The second is looking at crisis intervention. The third is around stops and detentions. And the fourth is around supervision. So those four areas are the core in the consent decree that really qualitatively and quantitatively look at constitutional policing in Seattle. We also base this methodology that you have on the last phase of the monitoring plan, what we call phase 2, which is essentially a time period in which the city and the monitoring team, the previous monitoring team, was looking at compliance and sustaining that over time. So one of the major facets we wanted to achieve was to be able to compare Seattle policing outcomes now versus over the previous years. And so there's a continuity that's in this methodology that makes sure we can compare 2020, the last year, to previous years in regards to use of force, crisis intervention, stops and detentions, and supervision. So you'll see that, as Manisha said, in that document that's quite long. I think it's 14 pages. You don't have to read it now, but you know, in the coming days here, review it, and you'll see that that continuity embedded there. Now, that being said, we want to work with you at really looking at how this can be improved over time, particularly what it should look like going forward into subsequent years. The reason I say that is because, again, we wanted this continuity from previous years, but also we want to lean into what the future may look like. And that future, whether there's a monitoring team or not, the future of accountability will be based on the CPC, the OIG, and OPA. And so as you review the methodology, we should be thinking about what should we build on in coming months, how do we want to augment it over time, and particularly what should we work together on this year to make sure that in 2022, who's ever running this methodology and collecting and analyzing and communicating it in collaboration with the police department, what that should look like going forward. So again, I'll turn it over to Manisha now, but you know, wanted to thank you for your engagement on this. The methodology plan, again, just I want to make sure I reiterate this a few times, is helping us to really look at Seattle Police Department in comparison to previous years and be able to level set right now and get a new comprehensive assessment of where they are. And our work together here, hopefully in the coming weeks and months, can build on that and position us really well going into the future. Manisha, would love for you to add to that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Antonio. I think the only elements that Antonio also could just add to this in terms of perspective. So again, this is a draft. And so we are providing this to you with just a little bit of an explanation to give the CPC an opportunity to be able to review it and feedback on it. So it is a 14-page document, and you'll see a lot of different recommendations for measurement, some of which, as Antonio mentioned, are based on what has been measured before to make sure that there's some continuity, and also some ideas of what we now know from the last year would be helpful to measure, would be beneficial for us to be able to look at. And we understand that the CPC has partners, past and present, that may be interested in also weighing in on this. And so we welcome you to share this documentation with them to collect that feedback, and also provide that and get that back to us. For just an additional area of, and I know the CPC has been very active in supporting statewide legislative work this year. A lot of the information that is also being fed in to this particular methodology has also been level set with the data that will be requested through the state data collection bill that the CPC has supported. And so the state collection bill that was sponsored by Senator Nobles, that appears to be passing this year, as we were working through this methodology process, we have coordinated with SPD to ensure that the data that's being proposed to be collected there will also already be collected within this process, so that there's already a level of continuity to being able to participate fully and wholly with the state in their data collection methods too. So I think that gives you just an overview, and we would like to open it up to any questions. What I'll say in terms of timeline, it is not the longest of timelines, but we would love to be able to have a draft of feedback back from the CPC by the end of next week. And so that would give you, this weekend up until next Friday. We do realize that that is a short time frame, but hopefully the data is not. It is something that not all of it's new. Some of it has been presented before in previous methodologies. If there is any heartburn with that particular time frame, though, please let us know. Our reason for the time frame is wanting to be able to work to finalize it and get it to the judge around the end of the month. But if there are any concerns about that, please do let us know. And I'll open it up to any questions if that's okay.
I think Reverend Walden has a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Thank you, Reverend.
Okay, thank you. I'm on multiple things today. I have a question because what you talked about today did not include what the judge had ordered. The judge had ordered us to work together on the methodology around the accountability piece, the OPA that was the legislation. Let me say it differently. 2019, the judge said that Seattle was out of compliance on the accountability. They were in sustainment in 2019 on the 10 places that was found under consent decree. They were out of compliance on the accountability system because the contract that the city had signed had rolled back all of the most of the gains all the way back to 2005. So what the monitor outlined today did not touch on anything that the judge had talked about in 2019. The accountability system that was out of compliance. It's what he did not mention today, and so I'm a little confused on the methodology because sounds to me that what you're trying to fix right now is what you're out of compliance based on what happened this summer. And I don't hear what the judge had ordered for 2019, and the city never worked with us. It was never a methodology. They never came back to talk to us about it. In fact, the city was trying to get them under the consent decree in May. We filed in court to say, no, you're not done yet. because you have not fixed the accountability system that the judge ordered us to fix. So it seems to me like we are on a different track right now. We're on one track to fix one thing, to come back into compliance, that you're out of because of this events of the summer. But we're not talking about the accountability system that the judge added to the consent decree, added to the findings. That was an add-on, and so I'm confused, and I really would like some more clarity on this. And I like to actually be involved with any other meetings at this, because I'm just kind of confused on it. That's all.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think, and I talked to Ms. Harrell yesterday, and told her what my concerns were.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And we welcome any commissioners. We are working right now to set up regular meetings with the CPC uh, leadership exec team to be able to sit down and kind of have more regular meetings, just check-in meetings. And of course, we enjoy coming to these meetings when we can be available. And so anytime that you have questions, we would absolutely come back here. But welcome anybody who wants to participate in the exec meetings to be able to participate in that. You are correct in that this does not address the shortcomings from the contract negotiations. This just addresses the data that we're collecting to review whether or not we believe there are patterns of going backwards or forwards. This is just to be able to see the patterns, but we don't have a central role as a monitoring team in saying what can or cannot be in the negotiated contract. We as the monitoring team and under the direction of the judge can provide guidance in terms of what may come from a negotiated contract, but we don't actually have the ability to veto or insert ourselves in that negotiation process. And I think the judge was fairly clear that he did not believe that the last contract kept the city in compliance, and we use that guidance in our feedback, but we don't have the ability to actually dictate how the city what the city sets as the terms of that negotiation. That is negotiated with the city and the police guild, and then ratified by the council. We certainly can provide our input, and we will, Reverend Walden, and we would hope that you would remain a partner in that work with us.
Thank you for that. I just have one more comment, because it just seems that, and maybe I'm just way out someplace else, and if I am, somebody could just tell me that. It just seems to me, if it was a finding, and the judge said the city was out of compliance on that piece, because remember, you were in compliance, you were in the sustainment plan, and he ordered the partners to work together to come up with the methodology. I don't see the partners, including the city, the API, the IG, and all of us working together to come up with a sustain, to come up to fix, come up with the methodology. I see that now that, I mean, the monitor and you, and this is good. I see that you are involved in this issue, and this is very good. But when the judge made when he made the finding, the monitor, I was, everybody was on the sustainment plan. And so I'm confused to the fact that, and if the parties have been working together, then I'll stand down and say that's okay, and I just wasn't involved with that. But I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this, and we had a robust conversation yesterday, and I appreciate the fact that you called me. I really do. I want to acknowledge that. I really appreciate that. But it just seems to me that we're going down two different. We're going down another path right now, and this path is to come. I know to come from under the consent decree. I understand that, but it's a lot to be fixed here now.
That's
You got
true.
you got the events of the summer. That, and then you have this other piece. So
Right.
anyway, I
So-
won't take up any more time. I'll just wait to see if I can be invited to one of the other meetings, and I will read the monitor. I didn't see that in
So
my
Reverend
email.
Walden, we have 6 minutes left or 5 minutes left
Okay.
before.
Okay, well,
we have to
but
move
this
to
is
our next-
important, and
So I'd love
I understand
for
that.
us
I
to be
thank you.
able to have other
Okay, thank
voices
you.
be heard.
Thank you.
And one of those is going to be mine because
Thank
we
you.
have an objection to the timeline that has been presented for us to give feedback to this.
Thank you.
We received this document 2 hours before this meeting today and had no heads up that this ask would be coming, that the document would be coming. We've had no opportunity to review or discuss it. And there's no way that we as a commission can in any meaningful way provide feedback. We'd also need to actually vote on whether or on what recommendations we want to put forward. Your timeline has us having to have to do that before even our next meeting. And so I have really significant concerns about the timeline, about the lack of communication around it, and about the ask. And so at the very least, and maybe Aaron or Brandy feel differently, but at the very least, the timeline has to be at least out past our next CPC meeting. So I want to say that. And then also, we had asked that the monitoring team come to talk about Reverend Walden's concerns with the commission in general, and not just in a conversation with Reverend Walden. So I want to raise that. It seems like I'm glad that we're moving forward with having monthly discussions, but it does seem like there are some real difficulties in communication between the monitoring team and the CPC. And so we'd like to iron that out and have expectations that work so that we can meaningfully provide information and not just be a checkbox.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why we've been working to set up the regular meetings with you all. I think that's been in the inbox for a while, and so we're hoping that once we can get a schedule from the team, that if you tell us what your schedule is, we're going to do our best to meet that. So we've had that request out there for a little bit, and I think the question in terms of timing is just, that was a recommended timing based on what our ideal world is. We know that doesn't always work out. And so if that doesn't work out, we would just love to know from you what you think a more appropriate time is.
I think it'll be appropriate that when we do have those meetings and we are in the process of scheduling those, that we give you sort of an overview of our process and how we work. But our executive group does not make decisions or respond to things for the commission. We can respond to things for which there is already an approved decision, and we help schedule things, but we do have to bring all recommendations before the full commission for a vote.
That's all. Yeah, that sounds fine with us, of course. And one of my main goals in this process is to really building up the capacity and the influence, I should say, as well, very openly, for CPC and OIG and OPA to be real accountability partners in the city for policing. And so your voice is critically important during this time, and we can adjust these timelines. This is the methodology that's part of the monitoring plan, that's part of the consent decree process. It's all been moving extremely quickly, even on Seattle times. So we're, we spent a couple weeks just really cramming to get this methodology moving. And so it's not having it to you earlier was not an indication of not wanting to engage. It's purely a matter of this past weekend, I was finalizing this methodology. So it would be, again, fantastic to have your feedback on it. If you can give us timelines, that would be good. Knowing that as well as we want to get this first round of data from Seattle Police Department based on this methodology. So as soon as we can get that data in from SPD based on this methodology, the sooner we can all start working on looking at those trends. And so as quickly as we can all move, that would be fantastic. And just wanted to, one quick thing too on the, just making sure we differentiate this methodology, as Monisha relayed as well, is around those 4 areas in the monitoring plan and the consent decree around constitutional policing relative to those categories there again: stops and detention, supervision, crisis intervention, and use of force. The term methodology for something like accountability in relation to union contracts is an entirely different thing. As Monisha relayed, that the monitoring team doesn't really have jurisdiction over, but we can help work on and advise with. So we would be very inclined to work with CPC to help communicate the needs for that, to bring this bring the city back into an area of trust relative to that. We know we have Pete Holmes coming up here next on the agenda, and Pete will be integral to that work from the city attorney's office perspective. So I just want to make sure there's that distinction there, and that this methodology we sent out today does not include any of those areas around union contracts.
Great, thank you
All
so much. We have an abbreviated time with the monitoring team today due to a scheduling conflict. And so we are at the end of our time with the monitoring team. And we will get back to you with the
Can I ask
timeline,
a
but I
quick
would
question?
presume that we literally are a minute over, but Asha, you have not been, we'd love to hear your voice, but know that we have like maybe 2 minutes because we're eating into Pete Holmes's time, which he has a hard stop at
No, I
10.
just have a quick question about the document of methodology that was sent. And if I've been reading as people were speaking on the supervisory, it's not clear if it's the only officers that are being monitored, but what about the middle management and so on? That's if it's a skip, it's another thing, but I was just wondering why that is not included. Thank you.
Quick answer there is it does include multiple layers of management, and there's some things around the force review board, force review unit, for example, that get to that. But note that comment, and as we work together on this next version, this next draft, we can make sure that that's clearly articulated.
Thank you.
Great. All right, well, thank you, monitoring team. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and we will be in contact with a timeline that actually works for us to provide meaningful input to your proposal.
Great, thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Laurent, before we head into the next section, we have, if the person organizing the Zoom can upgrade a couple of attendees into panelists, should be part of the panel. Jesse, are you?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have my text with who needs to be upgraded?
Oh, I do not. I'm sorry about that. Sorry, I think my phone's actually having issues right now.
Aaron,
can
we'll
you just
work on it behind the scenes. We'll work on it behind.
Yes,
the scenes.
perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Our next presenter today is City Attorney Pete Holmes. He is serving his 3rd term as Seattle City Attorney. I believe he began his role on January 1st, 2010. He supervises an office of about 100 lawyers and 85 legal professionals and is Seattle's misdemeanor prosecutor. Mr. Holmes also has a sole supervisory control of the city's litigation, and clearly plays a deep role in the consent decree litigation. I do want to give, we have new commissioners here, and we've been talking about the consent decree, and I'm just going to give like a really high level, quick summary of the consent decree, where it came from. There will be a more substantive training on this for folks, but would have been helpful before the monitoring team, but I just am going to run through just so people have that here. So in 2010, after a summer of deeply concerning instances of deadly and unnecessary force, including the death of John T. Williams and other community members of color, 35 community organizations led by the ACLU of Washington sent a letter to the Department of Justice asking that it investigate whether SPD had engaged in a pattern or practice of violating civil rights by subjecting people to excessive uses of force. The DOJ launched an investigation and ultimately found that SPD had unlawfully violated constitutional rights by subjecting individuals to excessive uses of force. The DOJ also found that there were serious concerns about bias, including racially biased policing. A settlement was reached, which is called the consent decree, that requires SPD to make certain changes to its policies, trainings, and practices. And the CPC is a result of this process. 11 years later, SPD is still under court observation for compliance. 11 years, my math bad, for compliance with the consent decree, which is the role the monitoring team spoke to earlier. Last year, during the height of the intense protest and police targeting Black and brown bodies and communities, the city asked the court to relieve it of its obligations under the consent decree. After so many community members experienced firsthand or watched videos of SPD's heavy-handed approach to protesters, there was a large community outcry and the city withdrew its request. And now Pete Holmes is here to talk to us about a number of things, the consent decree and any other questions that we may have. Pete.
Thank you, LaRon. I really am very happy to be here with you all today. Just one very short jaunt down memory lane. I actually began my career in public service by serving as on the very first Police Civilian Oversight Board, a precursor, if you will, to the CPC called the OPA Review Board, or OPARB. My work for OPARB then inspired me. I was appointed by City Council, but that service, a number of years, led me to actually run for a city attorney, all again as a direct result of what I perceived to be a lack of transparency in police oversight in Seattle. So suffice it to say, these issues, the consent decree, police reform, the future course of policing in Seattle are all very, very dear to me. Now, of course, the mayor and SPD together, they set the policies or develop plans to achieve compliance under the consent decree. And then the council, of course, sets the budget as well as weighing in on policy for the department. Together, the mayor and the council constitute our legislative authority under state law. And it's my job to both advise that legislative process as well as to defend actions. We represent the city's adopted policy and present that to the court. And I'm essentially an advocate for the city as a whole, before Judge Robart in the consent decree. So I understand that there's three main issues you wanted me to address. And the first being, what are some of the SPD's accomplishments under the consent decree? And yes, LaRon, your math's right. It's going on 11 years since the consent decree was signed off on in January of 2012. The second item I'm going to touch is, where do things stand now under the consent decree? There's already been lots of references to, for instance, last summer and the wake of the racial reckoning that is broadly being demanded across the country and in Seattle, and in SPD's troubling response to those protests here in the city of Seattle. And then the last question is, how can the CPC and my office work together? I think you're already familiar with the two lawyers that we have permanently assigned to you. I am your legal counsel, and I do want to support your mission while respecting your independence. And so I want you to know I'm always available to come and speak to you. But I look at it, it's you control your agenda, and I am happy to stay away or answer questions for you anytime that you would like. So before I go into those 3 points, I just want to again reemphasize the role. LaRon, you very accurately summarized the charter authority. I'm the only elected city attorney in the state of Washington. There's only a handful of us across the country. And under our city charter, the city attorney has sole supervisory control over all the litigation of the city and all of its departments. That means that I'm the city's lawyer and that I represent the city, again, as a whole in court. I do not have authority to set SPD policy or negotiate labor contracts. I have opinions about those certainly, but I try to share those with my clients. Those certainly have become issues in the consent decree, and the underlying policy, though, those decisions are not up to me. I'm always happy, again, as I said, to come here and engage with you and talk about the city's legal positions. But do remember that the entities responsible, that is the mayor, the SPD, and the city council, are the ones that are ultimately responsible for those final policies, and you should, I encourage you to involve them in these discussions. So what have we accomplished under the consent decree? As Laurent did a great job explaining the context and a broader context. Why are we under a consent decree? I want to emphasize a few of the things. First of all, she noted, excuse me, in particular, the shooting death of John T. Williams. And while that single death by itself isn't why we're in the CD under the consent decree, it's because that DOJ, looking at that shooting, along with others, found a pattern of unconstitutional policing in which, in particular, SPD officers were using excessive force. In fact, they put a number on it. They said that 20%, 1 in 5 uses of force by the SPD, this is in December of 2011, 1 in 5 uses by the SPD exceeded constitutional limitations under the Fourth Amendment. That is, they were excessive force being used. Excuse me. And they were especially critical in these applications of force when it was a crisis situation involving someone, for instance, having a mental health crisis or some other behavioral health problem. It could also include drug abuse. After DOJ made these findings, and I think that everyone will remember that 20% finding just stood out to everyone that was observing and that had been involved in police reform at that point. The DOJ, this time it would be under the Obama administration, where Eric Holder was the Attorney General. They came to the city and to me as the city's lawyer and said that we need to either negotiate a consent decree, a settlement agreement, which would address the findings of the DOJ and take corrective actions, or they would take us to court. And in that long series of negotiations that spanned a good at least 6 months, it finally culminated in the lengthy consent decree that we have today. And as Laurent pointed out, it also led directly to the creation of the CPC. So, and the bottom line, just to summarize the consent decree in one sentence, is this, that it requires SPD to develop new and reform policies and then retrain its officers on all of those new policies. After that, an independent court-appointed monitor, Antonio and Monisha's predecessor, Mr. Merrick Bob, conducted a series of assessments over a number of years as these policies were being developed, and to determine whether or not they had actually fixed the problems in the field. The monitor, again, this is the court-appointed monitor, found that the consent decree had resulted in dramatic improvements. They found that they had reduced, the SPD had reduced its overall use of serious force by 60%. This was according to a docket entry that was filed in 2017. The monitor also found that because of SPD's new crisis intervention program and the training that came with that it had become really rare, incredibly rare, for SPD to use force on people experiencing mental illness or substance abuse issues. And in those incidents, the SPD uses force in less than 2% of the time. And in most of these cases, they only use the very lowest classified level of force. The monitor and DOJ have gone back in subsequent years and confirmed that SPD maintained these improvements. I know that Reverend Walden emphasized that it was in January 2018 that Judge Robart found the city to be in full and effective compliance of the consent decree. And then that set in motion a 2-year sustainment plan to see whether or not they could maintain these, what they had achieved under the consent decree. So where do the things stand now under the consent decree? Based on the court's rulings and the events of last summer, I would say that the two most important issues currently under the consent decree, and I think I've heard that reflected in the remarks today, are accountability and crowd management. First, the court found, as Reverend Walden noted, that the city is out of compliance on accountability. Currently, our accountability system includes OPA, the Officer and the Inspector General, and you, the CPC. But in the early years of the consent decree, the system looked really different. It was a memorandum of agreement that between the city and DOJ that provided the CPC, that's you, would, quote, review Seattle's current three-pronged civilian oversight structure to determine if there were changes it would recommend for improving SPD accountability and transparency. Now that work led to the accountability ordinance that was passed in June of 2017, which created the structure that we know today, the OPA, OIG, and the CPC. Now, there's another force of laws in effect with the city that we must contend with, and that I have responsibility as the chief legal counsel for the city to ensure we observe. And that is, of course, the state labor law. The city labor negotiators had engaged in bargaining for the accountability ordinance with the police unions. And as it's also required under state law, that bargaining resulted in compromises. That seems to be the thrust of all of our concerns today, compromises in the areas of accountability and discipline. That bargaining was completed in November of 2018. And remember, Judge Robart found us in compliance in January 2018, and the new contract was completed in November of 2018. And as you're all very familiar with, this organization criticized the bargaining agreement and wanted stronger reforms in accountability and discipline. The court agreed with you. The court ruled that the city had fallen out of compliance with the consent decree in the areas of accountability and discipline. So your co-chairs have asked me for an update on pending appeals. I think it's appropriate if I go ahead and plug that in at this point, but because again, that's another role of my office, is to help advise the accountability system as it goes along, and then ultimately to defend decisions by the chief of police on discipline. So it's important to understand that in all of the pending appeals, I testified last week, by the way, before Representative Goodman's committee on Senate Bill 5051, which would gain additional management prerogative in the area of police discipline. And our pending backlog of arbitrations was one of the things that we discussed. So it's important to remember, though, that for all of these appeals, excuse me, for all of these appeals, where there's a termination for excessive use of force, throughout the appeal, the officer is no longer carrying a gun or badge or being paid. And so the status quo is actually the chief's discipline is maintained throughout the appeals process. And as the city attorney, I have limited means in which to expedite these appeals, other than perhaps compromising them, and that in itself has some, the nature of a compromise is that it's something that everyone's giving up something. But the most important thing to remember, though, is that during the pendency of the appeal, that the officers in question are not being paid and have no authority to act as officers. So today, there are presently about 70 pending appeals. 2/3 of those involve low-level discipline, and that, where the discipline was actually a reprimand, for instance, written or oral. And if it seems like 70 is too many, there was some debate about that in front of Representative Goodman's committee last week. Then, as I mentioned, we could reduce this by compromising, but again, I try to involve all the parties when we ever look at something like that. But for the most part, I think that we recognize the status quo is really that the city's disciplinary decision does stay in control. So in addition to accountability and discipline, I've already agreed that crowd management is an important issue in the consent decree. I think that we all recognize as city council was trying to act, and based on the findings of the court back in January of 2018, early in 2020, after 2 years under that ruling, the city did move to terminate not the entire consent decree, but rather the sustainment plan that was set in motion in January of 2018, and it explicitly left accountability as a matter to be addressed further before the court. Now, soon after, though, as we all know, on May 25th of last year, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, and the response was overwhelming across the country, in fact, across the planet. And there were a lot of questions that were raised about SPD's response here in Seattle. At that point on June 4, after a little over a week after his murder, I withdrew that pending motion to terminate the sustainment plan. I stand by that decision, and as I said at the time, SPD's accountability system was about to undergo the most rigorous testing, stress testing, since its inception. And that's really what we're undergoing today with a new monitor. And I would add that as we and the methodology that you are looking at today is really to try and assess, where is SPD today? It's no longer just contingent on the January 2018 findings by the court, but where are we today? And I do believe that what we saw unfold in Seattle streets last summer and continuing to some extent to the present is going to be very, very instructive about where Seattle stands. So I think I've already mentioned that Gary Smith and Teresa Chen are two assistant city attorneys that help you guys as you weigh through these issues. And they are just part of a number of lawyers in my office that are helping me to answer the questions about what did happen this summer. And I just want to stress that it's not just for the consent decree and where we go from here with our new monitor and what does 2022 look like. I need to know because I'm also defending a full array of lawsuits that have various theories about what happened, what unfolded on the streets of Seattle last summer, from excessive force being used by the police on the one hand to inadequate protection of private property on the other. Those are lawsuits that I have to respond to. And as part of that effort, my office is engaged in that very profound and single question: what did happen? And why did this happen? Why did things unfold the way they did? It's critical to my mission, and I think it's also critical to yours. So as I've mentioned earlier, I'm going to just try to recap here. We provide advice to you, to OPA, to the Inspector General. I'm always happy to engage with you. I want to encourage you to keep engaging with SPD and the mayor's office, because they really are critical in your ability to influence the course of developing policy in the city. And as we get to the next round of bargaining, that will probably start sometime next year after this year's elections. I just remind you all how vitally important you are. Sometime in early January, we're going to inaugurate a brand new mayor. It'll be my 6th mayor if, in fact, I'm reelected and brought back to this office. The city will be negotiating a new contract and really just starting to set parameters for that new contract. We'll be selecting a new chief of police. There has never been a time where your input on behalf of the community has been more important in my mind. We are truly at a turning point. And I think that this year is vitally important to answer that threshold question: where are we today? Where is this department? And, for instance, and more directly answering the questions: what happened over the summer? And I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you. And I just want to point out that, the methodology is the appropriate focus right now. That's what's going to help us to answer those questions. I think the monitor has come forward with a great plan. And, but to talk about what's going to happen beyond that monitoring plan and the deep dive that's happening now, the elections of a number of citywide offices this summer, it's all teeing us up for 2022. And after April of 2021, when the monitor is going to begin assessing this, where we stand today, there's really no clear roadmap and of where we go from here, because we have to answer those threshold questions. You're going to be a part of that. I'm anxious to stay in touch and engage with you as we do that. And then that's going to really determine the course of policing in Seattle after we take that pulse. So I think that we know after this year, we're all going to be engaged. My hope is that the relationships we're establishing here will allow us to move forward, to reach an understanding as a city about where Seattle needs to go. What do we want our police department to look like? And I think that those are all wide open questions that within the framework of the existing consent decree, I'm anxious to assist. So with that, I want to be able to answer any questions that you might have. That's just my broad overview at this point, including I can do a deeper dive into some of those pending discipline cases if you'd like.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to open this up to commissioners who might have questions, want clarification, want to explore any of the topics that Pete Holmes raised. Prachi Dave has her hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Holmes, for joining us. Really appreciate your time in discussing this very, of course, very important subject. I think you had, alluded to kind of what are the various positions with respect to the protests, last year. And, of course, the possibility that, at any point in time, there is a possibility that raise themselves again. And so I would be really interested in kind of your thoughts, city attorney's office's thoughts about the other ways in which the consent decree is implicated by the various protests that happened last year and the other elements that were implicated. As you mentioned, then at that point in time, early last year, you all had filed to terminate the sustainment plan and then withdrew that motion. And I think that there was good reason for that to be the case, absolutely. And so maybe if we could just explore a little bit further which additional elements of the consent decree were implicated by those protests outside of, what Judge Robart had already found with respect to compliance with the consent decree.
You bet. And thank you, Prachi. I'm happy to be called Pete, by the way. So I think that the most obvious answer to your question would be in some of the subsequent litigation that was filed. I alluded to it a bit earlier. As you know, Black Lives Matter and a group of other plaintiffs did file a lawsuit that was ultimately assigned to Judge Richard Jones, who is one of the fellow judges on the federal bench here, along with Judge Robart, who presides over the consent decree. At the same time, City Council was, quite concerned with events as they unfolded. And as you know, they took measures to directly control some of the crowd control weapons that SPD was using in response to the disorder on the streets in the summer. That was the subject of two different motions in front of Judge Robart. Even though the lawsuit was in front of Judge Jones, it clearly implicated some of the reforms under the consent decree. And Judge Robart did ultimately enjoin, he issued a temporary restraining order, not allowing the council's ordinance that in turn limited the use of crowd control weapons, less lethal weapons, until we could go through the process that's mandated under the consent decree. That's what's going on right now, but that's probably the most direct and cogent impact on the consent decree. But I think we all, excuse me, in the reform community, were very concerned about what we saw, and we're interested in a variety of issues. I know personally, how much does de-escalation policy? Those are the kinds of things that will be examined under the new monitoring team as we go forward and try to understand better what did the events of the summer reveal about weaknesses in the reform plans for SPD. But that's probably the most direct one. Judge Robart's order that was, with our assistance, was converted into a preliminary injunction. So at this point, I think that we are taking a breath. You should be involved in that as the council moves forward on considering crowd control weapons. We are doing our responsibility to make sure that the monitoring team and the Department of Justice are all part of that process and ultimately will be presented to Judge Robart. I'm trying to think, Prachi, if there's any other direct impacts, but that's probably the most poignant one from where I sit as the city's chief legal officer.
Great, thank you so much. And I think that we at the CPC would all very much appreciate being a part of those conversations moving forward.
You bet.
Great. All right. Thank you. We know that you have a hard stop at 10 o'clock and it is 10. So thank you so much, Pete, for joining us and sharing your insights and thoughtfulness about the city's approach and also helping us understand sort of how the issues that we've seen as a community in the past year with SPD's actions intersect with the consent decree and giving us a bit of an idea of what we can expect moving forward. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Please call on me anytime I can help.
We certainly will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I am going to call up our Sergeant at Arms, Esther Lucero, to lead us through public comment.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Just to give some general rules around public comment, as we are holding everybody to 2 minutes speaking time as outlined in our bylaws. And today we have Dr. Howard Gale, who would like to provide public comment.
Sorry, just 1 second. All right, Dr. Gale, you should be on.
Thank you, Howard. Okay, co-chairs, it looks like that Howard is the only person who signed up for public comment today. So at this point, we'd like to conclude public comment.
Thank you. Now we're going to move into updates. Do we have a Department of Justice update?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My update is just that we are also working with the monitoring team to provide input on the methodologies that you guys are reviewing as well. I'm happy to engage in any discussions you may want to have on those topics. I think that Pete and the monitoring team did a good job of sort of providing the rough history of the consent decree. But of course, we can always answer questions about that or the positions of the Department of Justice at any time that you guys would like. I myself have been on this case since 2014, so I can certainly give sort of context around any of the issues as they've come up. But that's all of the update I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Okay. Not seeing any questions. Do we have an update from City Council?
Thank you, Erin. This is Newell Aldrich from Councilmember Herbold's office. She is chair of the Public Safety and Human Services Committee. The one update is regarding SPD budget legislation. It's planned for the agenda next week, and Councilor Herbold has requested amendments from other council members. She is considering SPD's proposals for spending, which include 1.4 million in civilian positions that were not funded in the adopted budget, and 2.2 million in technology spending. She is also interested in the Inspector General's recommendations regarding evidence storage and the city auditor's recommendations regarding public disclosure management. And believe that is it on my end, other than noting the monitor has raised the possibility of being in touch with the judge about budget issues in this context. Thank you.
Thank you. And now from the mayor's office, Austin.
Good morning, everyone. So just wanted to quickly update you. I believe most of you are aware, but as a reminder, tomorrow in Olympia, the House Public Safety Committee will be considering SB 5051 and potential amendments around decertification of officers. So something important to kind of just keep a track of, and want to thank the CPC's continuing support on that effort. And then just a quick note from our office, this Friday will be my last day in the mayor's office. I've accepted an opportunity outside of the city. So moving forward, please connect with Deputy Mayor Tiffany Washington and then Dominique Stevens from our external affairs team. And I'll make sure to get them looped in on everything that we've worked on so far and get them connected to be attending meetings on a regular basis. It's been a pleasure working with all of you over the last about year. I really appreciate all your hard work. So thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Do we have an update?
Thank you so much for the work that you've done with the CPC, and I just want to wish you the best of luck moving forward.
Thank you.
Do we have an update from the office from OPA? Not seeing anyone. Okay. And from OIG?
Good morning, everybody. Just a really super quick update. We've started a couple of projects with SPD in the topic areas of responding to persons in mental health crisis and people with edged weapons, and also on their pursuit policy and some training. So I'll be in a better position to update you on what that work looks like at your next meeting. I just wanted to put a little pin in those two issues for you. That's all I have. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you. And now we're on to CPC updates. I'll look to my co-chair to see if you want to add anything to the co-chair updates. Otherwise, I'd like to use this opportunity to introduce some of our new commission members that we haven't met here. These are council appointees, and give them an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about themselves and why they'd like to serve. And we will start with Dr. Naveen Pinto.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name's Naveen Pinto. I'm a Seattle resident and a pediatrician and cancer researcher at Seattle Children's Hospital. I felt the need to serve after the senseless murder of George Floyd and others in our community. Rather than wringing my hands and being concerned, I felt that the CPC was a good way to get involved and to make my voice heard. Specifically, I want to elevate the voices of the youth of Seattle, who I serve in my role as a pediatrician. I hope to use my skills as a researcher and somebody who practices evidence-based medicine to bring those skills to the table. I recognize that I don't have much experience in policing or police oversight, and so I will likely be doing a lot more listening than talking, but I'm happy to serve in any way the commission sees fit. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you. And I'll just make a point to point out that you have a very robust onboarding program coming your way that hopefully will bring everyone up to speed with where we are. So Tasha Johnson, welcome.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am Tasha Johnson. I currently work for Choose 180, which is in Burien, and my interest in joining the CPC well, I actually didn't know that the CPC existed until a little over a year ago, but even before then, I've seen firsthand the effects of community and policing not working together with having family members that have been affected by various forms of what they would perceive as police brutality, and also in the work that I do every day at Choose 180, I'm seeing how young people are affected by policing, and how they perceive the police at this time. And I would really like to work to remedy those two perspectives and bring them together to be able to coexist in the community. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going down a little rabbit hole here, but yes, I would like for them to be able to coexist in the community. And that's my main interest in joining the CPC, is after I discovered it existed, I really wanted to be a part of the solution.
Thank you so much. Austin Field?
Thank you. I was an infantry officer, an Army infantry officer for just shy of 5 years, including a 9-month deployment to Afghanistan. And while I was over there, the Ferguson protests against police violence erupted, and I was pretty disturbed by the parallels between occupation of Afghanistan and the way that we police parts of our own cities. And so that kind of led to my interest in police reform. And after I got out of the Army, I worked as an investigator for the Bronx Defenders, which is a public defense organization in New York, which exposed me to other troubling aspects of the criminal justice system. And so I decided to attend law school to become a public defender, and I'm currently a full-time law student at the University of Washington, and I'm also practicing as an advocate in Tulalip Tribal Court right now. And so I think I see my role on the commission to try to bring more students into the commission, hopefully including as commissioners, because I think that those are very important voices. And obviously, students have been at the forefront of a lot of the current activism surrounding policing in Seattle. And I think it's really important to make sure that we are listening to those folks and incorporating them actively in discussions as much as possible. So that's primarily how I see my role.
Thank you. Reverend Patricia Hunter?
Hi, I am Patricia Hunter, and I serve 2 congregations on the pastoral staff at Seattle First Baptist Church and Mount Zion Baptist Church. Both of them are on Capitol Hill, and I was actually born in Seattle, so I have some very deep roots in this community. I'm also a retired certified financial planner. I saw how policing took place last summer and during the protests, and was pretty appalled at what I saw. I also am concerned about policing and excessive force with those that have mental health issues. And so I just want to lend my voice and support that better policing can be done in communities of color and with those with mental health issues. So that's why I wanted to serve on the police commission.
Thank you. Erica Newman?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Erica Newman, and I'm happy to be on the commission. I was interested in joining the commission just because I've done a lot of community work. I've worked with youth, and I've also worked with members of other, I guess you could call them marginalized or disenfranchised communities. I know back in 2010 when John T. Williams was killed by Seattle police, it was Reverend Walden and I that secured a place in the central area for the citizens to come voice their concerns. And it's also the location, we also use the same location to do the press conference. So I have a big interest on, I guess, just equitable and fair policing policies. And so I look forward to learning and to contributing the best way I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also want to note that we did have a reappointment of a commissioner, Asha Mohammed, and give Asha an opportunity to say hi to everyone if she would like as well. And Asha.
Hi, good morning. I'm Asha Mohammed, homegrown Seattle person. It's very funny. I think all the new commissioners speak a part of my life in so many ways. But I joined CPC honestly for accountability for people that English is not their first language, that most of the time are not neither equitably or equally engaged in such a conversation of accountability. Thank you and welcome all.
Thank you. Just for a housekeeping issue, this brings our total commissioner count up to 19, which I know I speak for all of my current commissioners in welcoming the new commissioners, because there's a lot of work to do and we're so glad to have you guys on board. For purposes of those who are process focused like me, that means that moving forward, our quorum number is 10. So with that, I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Brandy Grant, for Executive Director updates.
Good morning again, everybody. Thank you. And I just want to say congratulations to the new commissioners. It's a joy to have you all. I'm looking forward to being able to work with you all and get you started on this really important work. So welcome. Really quickly, Jesse has sent around bio information forms for everyone. We're still trying to get headshots and bio information so we can make sure that we have an updated website. That's something that we're going to be working on and doing a better job of keeping it updated and making sure that is easy and accessible. So I know those forms have been sent around. Many of you have already sent those back. Please continue to send them. We really appreciate it. Also too, for the CPC new commissioners, for the last 6 months, I've been working on an onboarding process and page. It is officially ready to go and live. New commissioners receive the links to be able to access a SharePoint page that will provide extended history of what the commission is, what we do, who we are, and also our accountability partners. And so I'm eager for them to be able to go through a thorough onboarding process that's really intentional. I also want to extend the onboarding process to commissioners that have also started within the last year. And I would love for any current commissioners or commissioners that have been on for a considerable amount of time to also be able to view it as well. So anyone that is interested, that has been a part of the commission, who would like to kind of have an overview of what that looks like, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and we will make that available to you. It's really important that we make sure that anybody that's joining the commission is given the resources and the tools to be able to dive into the work that we have ahead of us. Another thing too, just to kind of put in everybody's purview, for the first 100 days, I'll be going over a work plan. There will be some opportunities for me to roll out different times to meet with community members and partners and stakeholders, but most importantly, present it before the full commission. One of those things that's extremely important to me that we need to beef up is community engagement. I want to send around a survey in this particular moment right now that should hopefully be hitting your inboxes. I'd like to survey and see what impacts were had for commissioners due to COVID-19 and some of the things that you were able to engage in and participate in. I'm going to be working on a district liaison re-implementation of how we do community engagement. I'm going to be thinking outside of the box a little bit. And so I want to make sure anything that we did for 2020 is captured, but most importantly, come up with a plan for 2021 and beyond. My final update that I have, I think is really crucial. We've had requests come into the CPC around work and partnerships and collaborations. And the one thing that I have not seen that I think would be really helpful is for an opportunity I'm working on to build criteria for CPC work proposals. So when stakeholders and partners approach us about work, there will be a process in place to help commissioners determine what new work should be added to the existing work and what work may need to be reprioritized, which leads us to an opportunity to revisit how we respond to emerging issues from community. I know it has been said in public comment that there are situations and unfortunate deaths and incidents that the CPC has not responded to, and I want to push back on that a little bit and say that we have, but we also could do a better job. And so in saying that, we will be working really hard to come up with criteria for how we respond to emerging issues and remind folks about what our core obligations are as a commission. So that's all I have at this time. Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you, Brandy, and for all of you that are paying attention. Brandy was sworn in on Monday, and is officially our ED. And I'm so excited to get started on this first 100 days with you. So join me in thanking her for taking on this really monumental task. So Esther, Sergeant at Arms, do you have any updates for the group?
No, just wanted to let the group know that we will be engaging in discussion today. And the co-chairs have asked me to remind folks that we need to give folks, that everybody here in the commission has an equal voice. We want to make sure that we step up and step back so that everybody can participate. And I just want to encourage that participation with respectful engagement. So that's all. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to my co-chair, LaRon Baker, for the next section.
So everyone, we're taking a different approach to today's meeting. We had a little bit of time that was given to us through the monitoring team's change. And one of the things that, sort of has consistently come up for us as a commission working remotely is we don't necessarily have an opportunity to hear everyone's voices about sort of the major pressing issues that are happening right now. We don't necessarily have the time to have collaborative conversations or just to even touch base about what commissioners are necessarily hearing from their communities or thinking. So we wanted to take this opportunity to try, especially now that we have new commissioners, to provide folks an opportunity to share what their thoughts may be or thoughts that they're hearing from communities that they're tied to or connected to about sort of the current state of SPD, with the recent deaths that have happened that have been so tragic, and sort of repeat issues around people, having a mental health crisis, having edged weapons, and officers responding so quickly and taking community members' lives, and also. We are almost a year out from significant public outcries about law enforcement practices in our community and nationwide when it comes to how we police communities of color and bodies of color. And I wanted people to just have an opportunity, or not we, the co-chairs, and Brandy, our executive director, have an opportunity for people to share their thoughts so that we can have an opportunity to get to know each other and have a more fulsome discussion around this issue. We slated 30 minutes for it. I don't know if we will take up the whole 30 minutes. I think it depends on how comfortable people feel, especially since this is the first time we've had this conversation or had this approach, but I'm really hoping to be able to hear voices that we don't usually hear and to hear about what people are getting from their communities. You know, we have a way that we get community input from commissioners and from community members on really specific things, but wanted us to have an opportunity to just share our thoughts around issues with policing that impact us all so deeply. And I know that we've had public comment already. So if there are members of the public who wish to, you know, also provide their comments in this area, please email the CPC public comment line, and we will incorporate that into the minutes and potentially read them at our next meeting, depending on how that goes. So commissioners, I'm hoping that there is one or two of you that are willing to sort of start off the discussion. You know, where do we think we are right now? How, you know, is the community that you're tied to in Seattle feeling about the most recent current uses of deadly force against community members? Where do you think we need to move in the next coming months when it comes to how SPD is responding to crowd control, how it uses force?
I will go first. What a surprise. So I think last year, particularly for people that have experienced civil war, that really never dealt with the atrocity, the inhumanity, and came to the United States and just chuckle along. I think it opened a very deep wound where I think that people, especially my community, we went to a period of time, and I don't think we're still over, of trauma bonding, and which is extremely paralyzing. I know that people carry something to protect when you don't feel you belong. And the people that's supposed to protect you, no matter how nice you are, they may take your life. So is this constant re-traumatization, I would say. And I think stepping back is not something we can afford, but giving ourselves permission to step back and really have a deep understanding of the historical engagement of police and how police views Blackness as a crime. Just to be Black is a crime in this country. So I think it's not going to be solved overnight, but I think the simplification of saying that community don't trust police officer is just scratching the surface. And I think it goes much deeper than that. And for my personal experience, both of my parents were people of uniform. My mother was a police officer, may she rest in peace, and my father was in the military. So there is this sense of respect for the uniform that it's deeply betrayed, I would say, in my values and how our current police or historically are policing. So a lot of healing, I guess. Not to be mushy about it, but that's what y'all asked for. But I think we cannot simplify understanding trauma response versus trauma reaction. And I think we're feeding a lot of the trauma reaction without any solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. Are there any other commissioners? It seems like Lisa Judge, so we're opening it up more broadly.
This is Commissioner Joseph. Oh, can I? Oh, sorry.
Actually,
yeah,
sorry.
go for it, Joseph. Sorry.
Joseph.
You know, I think about our young people that have have taken to the streets, day in and day out, are committed young Black and Brown organizers that are really fostering a movement for racial justice. And how do we have our policing system sort of incorporate some of, the beauty, the intelligence, the wisdom, and the smarts of our young people that are really trying to transform, the realities that we live in. And just thinking about the iteration of the next few months, we really need to decenter ourselves and find ways to really lift up the leadership, the collective organizing of our young folks, and also just increasing their capacity to be co-designing policies, policing, policies around policing. So they're the ones that are, at the fore. They're the ones that are, policed, right? So thinking about our young people, and also thinking about those that are facing housing insecurity, and how the CPC can really begin to also work with our folks that are experiencing homelessness in a deeper way. I know that there are homeless leadership bodies that have organized around the regional housing authority. That community is completely victimized, right? In a lot of the recent police actions that have come up, and how do we also iterate as well, and partner effectively with folks with lived experiences that are on those streets of Seattle, that are, people are marching over their homes, right? People are, all this is happening, in places that they, call home, right? Um, yeah, that's all. Thank you, Laron, for opening up the floor.
Any other commissioners? I see Reverend Hunter.
Thank you. I think in some of the communities that I represent, there's a real anxiety about what's going to be happening in the spring and the summer. With the George Floyd murder trial happening, there's just a sense that there's probably going to be some protests going on. And how will the police respond? This time, that's going to be different than how the excessive force we saw last summer. So there's some anxiety there. There's also anxiety around, I believe it was 6 officers that went to DC for the work. They may not have been part of the insurrection, but they were there. And what happens? Was there any kind of discipline that's going to be taking place with those officers? So there's an issue of trust in our communities of color, knowing that there are police officers that may have some connection to white supremacy. Also, my concern is always with those who are experiencing mental health episodes. And there was a Black woman in my community yesterday that was obviously having an episode. And my first thought that after the police came was, I hope they don't kill her. And when that's the first thought about what happens with someone who's having mental health issues, that's a problem. When my concern is she going to live because the police were called? So there's just some major trust issues that we really need to build upon. And when there are decisions on excessive force and what tactics will not be used that were used last summer, that needs to be communicated to the public, so we know ahead of time what's going to be different and what decisions have been made, that the police decide that they're not going to hurt people this coming year in ways that they did last year when it comes to protests and excessive force. So thanks for asking.
Thank you, Reverend Hunter. Elena Santian.
You. I already feel rambly in my brain, so hopefully it does not come out that way. But thank you, Reverend Hunter, for what you shared. I think I share similar concerns. You know, I think a long time ago in a different life, I worked as a social worker, and you know, we definitely had young people who were struggling with mental health crisis, who maybe had just different issues going on. And I think that, like, I was never given any weapons to de-escalate those situations. And so just, I think the reason I'm thinking about this too is just, there are so many things happening in the city that I feel like that I'm just unaware of because I'm distracted with what is happening specifically in Seattle around policing. Like, I think the Everett City Council is voting on the bill today that's like a no lie, no sit, or no sit, no lie on a strip of property up there that essentially would like make it illegal for you to sit or lie down if you're houseless. They're putting other barriers up for like Good Samaritan permits. So if you want to provide services or food or aid to folks experiencing houselessness, you have to get a permit for that. And I'm just thinking about, you know, the ways this is trickling out across, like, not just in Seattle and King County. Obviously, we have issues there. I mean, what's happening over in Mercer Island for people who are houseless. And really, it has me thinking, I think, beyond policing as to, like, how can we as commissioners, as CPC folks, and just as community members, build collective power with those organizations that are really trying to address the needs. I think there's this criticism and expectation of folks who are part of like defunding movements, or if they're working towards abolition, or maybe they're somewhere in the middle of like, well, how are you going to keep everybody safe? Like it has to be this thing that just happens overnight automatically, rather than it being, you know, as it's going to take time to like build infrastructure for our communities to be able to take care of one another. And for me personally, this is not coming, again, this is my own, you know, this voice is not coming from an anti-cop sentiment. And also at the same time, I think as a non-Black person who is not someone who is most impacted negatively by policing, I'm consistently trying to decenter myself in these conversations. And like all of you know, like I have a good relationship with Officer Mullins, with Mark, and every time we talk, I tell him, hey, I love you, like be safe. Like we have a good relationship. We joke, we laugh, we tell stories. And we also are able to have really challenging conversations. And that's deeply important to me in processing this. And then also just as a, I guess, call in for, I did this in the community engagement committee last night too, for non-Black folks who are part of this conversation. And other folks who have different identities that are most impacted, just constantly be decentering ourselves in that conversation, but being sure that we are not creating models of communities of color or BIPOC folks either, because people have different opinions and different outlooks. But I think for communities and spaces that I move about in, I don't have a clear cut, one group thinks this way, one group thinks that way. And I think we get into issues with like how white folks are allowed to be individuals, but people of color get to be groups rather than individuals like ourselves. And so I don't know, there's just a lot of things that are resonating for me. And I think I'm just, as we are fighting for police officers to be held accountable when they're making you know, decisions that are negatively impacting communities, that there's actually I think because trust has been broken, I don't remember who was saying that, I think it was Asha, because trust has been broken, how do we build that back up? Even if the goal is abolition, even if if all of us in positions of power, as Toni Morrison says, like to dream a little before we think, if we have an opportunity to dream a little before we think, like how are we dreaming of different ways of doing things? So sorry, I was a little rambly, but there are a lot of things going on, I think, in my head, and trying to process a lot of different perspectives. And gosh, for me, I'm just trying to support community organizers, communities that are most impacted around like building infrastructures to take care of our communities, and trying to figure out how to do that as a commissioner and as an individual. So thanks for holding that and letting me share.
Thank you, Elena. I appreciate it. Next will be Esther, and then after Esther will be Reverend Walden.
Thank you, Laurent. You know, I'd have to tell you, I'm really grateful that Alina went before me, because a lot of those things really resonate. I think in our community, we have the spectrum of folks who are, you know, in favor of police abolition. And then we have the folks who are really, you know, if we think about it as a broad spectrum, concerned about public safety. But most importantly, I think there's frustration with inaction and a lack of a clear strategy and actionable steps to move forward. I think that we consistently sit in this place of, you know, this reactionary place where we're focused on holding police accountable when really we're talking about a system of structural and institutionalized racism. And, you know, I recognize that we've asked too much of police officers to, you know, go way beyond their training in policing and providing mental health and behavioral health services. And I'm still looking at a lack of resources to really address these from a community-based way. And then I just worry about, you know, the spectrum of folks who are having a hard time finding alignment even amongst one another. So I think really there's just unrest with more of the same and lack of action.
Thank you. Reverend Walden.
Thank you so much. One of the things that we're concerned about, my community, we're concerned about the lack of not having enough officers in the special units. It seems to me when we wrote a letter to the police department, we asked about the last shooting and that the 2 officers were they CIT trained and how many officers are they down in that area. Also, we're concerned about the whole city and public safety, and that there's a whole issue around public safety right now and the escalation of crime, because we also get calls from people who have been affected by crime, and seems to be no resolution to those kinds of things that we're concerned about, and that the whole city, all of the elected officials took an oath to provide public safety for the whole city. And we're concerned that that's not really happening right now. In a community that I represent. And I like what Alina said, we all come from different communities. And so I'm mainly talking about Mother's Police Council right now. But I thank you for the opportunity to have a word. I appreciate you here for being able to represent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Walden. Erica Newman.
Hi, thank you. I guess I just want to say that in my community, there's a lack of trust. There's a fear. And what I'll say is that in the media, it was recently disclosed that police response times are longer than usual, possibly due to the lack of available officers. And when I hear that, I wonder if the lack of available officers equals officers working extra long hours, which then puts them in circumstances to repeat excessive use of excessive force. And there's a saying today that the new American way for a Black man to die is at the hands of the police. And with that, I'll say that when hate happens in one place, it doesn't stay there, it spreads. And for that, I want to lift up the Asian community as well and think about ways we can support them as they grapple with the issues in the community. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any other commissioners who wish to share their thoughts, perspectives, add their voice to the conversation? Suzette Dickerson.
I will say that working with my community, there has been a fear, and that is, excuse me, that is because down in downtown Seattle, they have actually, there have been some folks that have been assaulted with there being no officers around to support them. And then in one instance, there was plainclothes sheriff's deputies that were actually there to be able to assist the assault that was transpiring. That being said, the communities that I am serving are worried about the defunding and the fear of there being so many, the fear of crimes raising, I should put it that way. And so I can't stress this enough, I think that we need to look at all the voices within the community and really hear out and try to find where we can come together to make these reforms that need to happen.
Great, thank you. Are there any other commissioners who wish to share their comments? Okay. I'm not hearing any other commissioners. Lisa Judge, you had your hand open or hand up earlier. Did you wish to share anything at this moment?
Thanks, Laurent. Yeah, I think what I'll do is just chat with you and Aaron and Director Grant offline. The things that Asha was talking about really resonated with me and made me want to offer maybe some time to come and talk about the peacemaking circle process that we've been using to facilitate communication between community and SPD with the Sentinel Event Review. And I think it's just been really interesting and helpful for me as a way to have some real communication around some really hard issues. So I'll talk with you folks and we can see if that might be useful for the commission at some later point. Thank you.
Isha, we really would like to hear from you. Please call me.
Yeah, I would love to, Asha. Let's get together.
Yeah, and we look forward to working with you too, Lisa, on this issue. Are there any other commissioners? So I do want to just thank everyone. I know this was an unusual way to try to have a discussion, but it seemed like it was so important for, us as commissioners to be able to hear people's individual thoughts and, what they're seeing in the communities in a way that was a little more open than some of our usual dialogue. So hopefully this opportunity has helped people, get a better feel of each other and hopefully it will encourage voices that aren't always part of the discussion to be more actively engaged with it as we go forward, with our meetings in the future. So I just want to thank everyone who shared for being willing to be open and share their thoughts with us all. And I think we are at the end of our agenda. I will turn it over to Brandy in case she has anything else or wants to close us out. But I just appreciate you all and look forward to the work that we will do in the months coming.
I'll just close it out and say how grateful I am for each one of you and how much I appreciate the work that we're going to be doing together. I know it's hard. I know it's heavy, but there are a lot of folks that are depending on us. And so I think we have some amazing people at the table to be able to work on this together and be productive. So I want to wish everybody a great rest of the day. And I look forward to talking to you all at some point the rest of the week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.